Namaskar. Welcome to today's webinar on Prime Minister 10-point Agenda number 10, Bring Greater Cohesion in International Response to Disasters, jointly organized by National Institute of Disaster Management and National Disaster Management Authority, Ministry of Home Affairs. No single group or organization can address every aspect of disasters, reduction and resilience. The scale, frequency and complexity of the disaster as both physical and social phenomena can only be addressed by deploying a wide range of knowledge, skills, method and resources. Therefore, risk reduction initiative should be multidisciplinary, partnerships enable organization to share ideas, work more coherently, deliver projects more effectively and influence decision makers. The Prime Minister 10-point agenda injected holistic approach in coherence of Sendai framework, sustainable development goals and Paris agreement in disaster management framework, which provided direction to address all the unprecedented challenge and prevent mitigate the adverse impacts of disaster on communities, development and prosperity. The 10th agenda of Prime Minister 10-point agenda emphasized to bring about greater cohesion in international response to disaster. Today's webinar aimed to enhance the understanding of the issues and solution on international collaboration for enhancing disaster risk reduction and resilience and promoting inclusive partnership at the global, regional, national and local levels built upon principle and values and upon a shared vision and shared goals, placing people and the planet at the center. To lighten us in the theme of webinar, in the inaugural session, we will be graced by the presence of V. Muralidharan, Minister of State External Affairs, Ministry of External Affairs, Shri GVV Sharma, Member Secretary NDMA, Lieutenant General Syed Ata Hasnain, Member NDMA, and we are also fortunate to have with us our distinguished speaker in the technical session, Brigadier Ajay Gangwarji, Advisor, NDMA, Shri Pradeep Kumar Jena, IAS, Managing Director, Odisha State Disaster Management Authority, Srimati K. Wanyang, District Disaster Management Officer, Rebhoi District, Meghalaya, Shri Mihir Bhatt, Founder and Director, All India Disaster Mitigation Institute, and Professor Surya Prakash, Head GMR Division, NIDM, who will share their knowledge and experiences. Now I would request Professor Surya Prakash, Head GMR Division, for his welcome address. Over to you, sir.
Let me just begin with this program, welcoming all our dignitaries who have joined with us in the panel, and also all the delegates who have joined us in the audience part. So we welcome all the dignitaries and the delegates of this webinar. Before we start, give a brief background of this program. This program is actually part of our 10 webinars that we had started with 10-point agenda on disaster risk reduction that was deliberated during the first post-Sendai Asia Ministerial Conference on disaster risk reduction at New Delhi. So this is Prime Minister's 10th point of the 10-point agenda, which is emphasizing on bringing about greater cohesion in international response to disasters. As we all know, that disasters do not know any boundary, whether it is political, administrative, functional, or geographical. So they cross all boundaries and transcend across boundaries. So hence it is very much required that we should have international cooperation, coordination, and collaborations, which has also been emphasized during the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction in the year 2015. So we have focused on this, and our Honorable Prime Minister has also emphasized on it. So we will be discussing about the common hazards across boundaries, common vulnerabilities, and common platforms which can be utilized for the sharing of resources, ideas, knowledge, technology, experiences, innovations for disaster risk reduction across borders. Not only valid within the country, across the country, also within the states as well, because at all levels and all sectors and have to be a cooperation and collaboration. Then only we will be able to succeed in our achievement of the goal, disaster risk reduction and resilience. So these words, I would welcome everyone on this webinar. And without wasting time, because we have good speakers with us, they will speak about the nature of cooperations and collaboration that we are doing through various international, global and regional frameworks and associations, as well as memorandums of understanding. And our government has also emphasized that we are joined in this program with none other than our Minister of State from Ministry of External Affairs. That is the importance given to this webinar and the international cooperation in the field of disaster risk management. And we'll be listening to speakers from NDMA, from SDMA, from BDMA, from civil society, NIM, and others, including all concerned disaster management authorities and concerned departments. So we will be talking about what are the plans and what are the MOUs and how we can bring more useful and practical aspects of disaster risk reduction and resilience, considering our regional, cultural, or our customs, traditions, and social, economical conditions, as well as environmental conditions. So these days we are very much sensitive to our environment and also disaster scenarios, which need to be taken care well through these corporations, because disasters are so high in magnitude, severity, spread, and their swiftness and suddenness that they cannot be managed until unless we pool our all kind of resources, whether it is knowledge or physical resources, financial resources, and we have to establish a prior protocols, procedures, and arrangements, mechanisms for enhancing our efficiencies for an efficient response mechanism. Besides this, we will also a little bit talk about the training, capacity building, sharing, and exchange of experiences, as well as communication and early warning systems. So with these words, I hope we will be able to institutionalize and strengthen our regional, international, and global cooperations using the international and global frameworks for disaster risk reduction. We have a lot of associations, particularly in our India. Government of India has taken part in several of these international cooperation movements and activities, particularly the BIMSTEC, SARC, BRICS, IORA, SEO, ASEAN, Indo-Africa Summit, and so on. So hopefully we will be apprised of these, some of them, and how that can be integrated. So with these words, I welcome everyone on this dais and hope this webinar will help enrich the knowledge and also strengthen our disaster risk reduction mechanisms and the human resources. Thank you very much. Dr. Harjeet, you may.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Yes. Thank you very much, sir. There is an important announcement. Our Chief Guest V. Muralidharan, Minister of State, External Affairs, is traveling and will join us as soon as he lands Kochi Airport. So we will carry on with our technical session till the time he joins us. So for our first presentation, we have Brigadier Ajay Gangwar, Advisor, National Disaster Management Authority, Ministry of Home Affairs.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Harjeet. Can you please give me the access to share my presentation? Is my presentation visible, Dr. Harjeet?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning to you, Dr. Surya Prakash, and my fellow distinguished panelists. This is a great opportunity to put forth one's views on this very important aspect in disaster risk reduction, that is international cooperation in response to international disasters. Time given to me is about 10 minutes, not sufficient to do justice. So I would try and skip certain issues and give a very concise view of response during international disasters. It was said in the introductory talk that hazards do not respect international borders, nor do they respect the status of the country, whether the country is developed or underdeveloped. They could emanate in some part of the world and affect other parts of the world. Some examples in the recent past are the Australian bushfire. The COVID-19 pandemic is the most apt example of this, is an apt example. To quote the UN Secretary General, global solidarity is not only a moral imperative, it is in everyone's interest. And we need to come together and offer an urgent and coordinated global response. This he was speaking in the context of COVID-19 pandemic. So this is a quote by the UN Secretary General. Closer home, in our context, we believe in the principle of Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam. Our Honorable Prime Minister has enunciated this a number of times, a number of fora, entire world as one family. So the international disaster response, coming to the topic proper, could be bilateral, or it could be under the umbrella of any multilateral institution like the UN OCHA's INSARAG or the World Health Organization's EMT initiative, Emergency Medical Team Initiative. It is of interest to note that there are certain countries, when they accept help from other countries during disasters, they only accept classified teams, especially the EMTs, the medical teams, while others may accept even the non-classified team. Most accept the non-classified teams also. Before I highlight certain aspects which can enhance the effectiveness of international disaster response, let us very quickly recap the process in which this response is given to an effective country. Whether the team is classified or otherwise, it's under the bilateral arrangement or it is under a body like UN. The international teams that are coming to help arrive at the nominated airport in the disaster affected nation. There are formalities of immigration that are to be fulfilled, what can be carried into the country, what cannot be carried, certain urgent exceptions and permissions are given for disaster related equipment and communication equipment and things like that. There is a reception center which is there, in which these teams report. Their reception is coordinated, and then they move to the on-site coordination center, the OSOC. From the airport to the OSOC is organized by the recipient country. The International On-Site Operation Coordination Center, the OSOC, is ideally situated close to the disaster site. Now, this is very important to coordinate the activities of various response teams that come for response or offering help during an international disaster. Now, as per the guidelines of UN OCHA's INSARAG, the LEMA, the Local Emergency Management Authority, may set up an OSOC in advance for receiving these international units, or the first team, international team that arrives on the scene is responsible to set this up so that the subsequent teams can be received there, tasked, and their efforts coordinated. From there, once the task and other things are allocated, they move to the disaster site, and under the LEMA, they carry out their respective roles. So this, in broad terms, is the process in which the international response is given. And this is only for the response, not for relief and other rehabilitation, reconstruction. I'll come to that slightly later. Now, experience has shown us, especially in the 2015 Nepal earthquake, that both the classified and the non-classified teams can be equally effective, or tongue-in-cheek could be equally ineffective. So there are teams that are classified teams who have been found to violate certain norms of behavior, and there are certain teams which are non-classified but are highly effective in providing relief during disasters. So the cohesion that we are talking of, the effectiveness that we are talking of, does not necessarily come from operating under a multilateral institution, but it will definitely help because you are following the same protocols, you are following the same terminology. When you are using similar equipment, you've got similar capabilities, and you know how to coordinate with each other. So it will help. While it is not necessary, but it will definitely help. We must remember that during the response phase, the golden hour is something that we need to watch out for. It is critical. So the time in which you become effective during the disasters is very important if you have to save lives. So in this aspect, the regional responders, whether they are part of a multilateral arrangement or not, have an edge. They have an edge due to very shortened deployment times. Just to give you an idea, during the Nepal earthquake, the NDRF teams, the first 6-7 teams of NDRF, were effective within 6 hours in Nepal. So that is how you can really cut down on deployment times. You have advantage of understanding the language in that region, the cultural aspirations of people. You are aware the context in which you are operating in the society. It gives you an edge over people who are coming from far off lands to give this help. Okay, so my next couple of slides, I have just jotted down certain thoughts that have occurred to me on enhancing the effectiveness of this process of providing response and, of course, receiving help in times of disasters in the own country. The protocols and procedures for both accepting international assistance and rendering, in case you are asked to provide assistance, should be very simple. And you should have fast track approval procedures. The decision should be taken quickly. Time is of essence. So if these protocols and procedures are simplified, your response will be better. In our country, there are over 6 ministries and departments which need to be taken on board for various clearances and other things before you can accept or render assistance. Now, the capability of the receiving country where the disaster has taken place is also very important. If you have a strong and effective local emergency management authority in that country, your coordination will be definitely much better. And it is the right of the recipient country to decline in case the assistance that is coming in is not proper or is of poor quality. There have been cases, and I quote from the Nepal experience itself, that people turned up even after they were told not to come. The response phase was over. People still came in. People came in with very little resources, just about 10 people to a team with 1 or 2 dogs and without any administrative backup. So they are a burden on the country that is asking for help. So if the Lima knows its beans and it is strong, then such like requests or such like things can be turned down, because they will not help you. They will only burden you at the time when you need all your wits about you. At the peacetime, common standards and joint training will definitely help in cohesion. Various teams can work together in international joint exercises. We've had a few in the country in the BIMSTEC nations, in various other collaborations that we have, multilateral collaborations. We've had a couple of exercises in the last 3-4 years, and we found them to be quite useful to understand each other's working styles, their capabilities, equipment, and style of functioning. Within the country that is receiving help, if you have pre-existing arrangements amongst various stakeholders, it will help. For example, if you have some kind of an MOU or some kind of understanding or some kind of orders existing for the Civil Aviation Ministry to provide aircrafts by cutting down protocols and red tape, and quickly make aircrafts available, it will help in early response. Also, the foreign mission in the affected country, our own foreign mission, if we are going and giving help to this thing, they play a very important role, and they need a degree of DM expertise to be able to tell you what is required or what is required, and coordinate various issues like where the relief is going to land, or where the relief teams are going to land, what the transportation will take place, or whether a particular airport has got a night flying capability. Not all these things, information, the country which is receiving aid is busy in other things, so your own foreign mission in that country can help you. Logistics is very important. You should have good equipment. You should be self-sufficient for transport, communication. You should not be a burden on the recipient country. And in this aspect, it has been found that the military forces, the armed forces, are playing a very important role in humanitarian assistance, because they have the wherewithal, especially for transportation and for communication. Like I said earlier, an effective LIMA, a capable national DM apparatus, is essential for good response. And we need to avoid a political and media-driven agenda. The agenda should be people-centric. It should be humanitarian in nature, and these things could be avoided. It is seen that the donor countries compete with each other to grab the limelight and be effective where it's most visible, to draw the mileage out of the efforts that are there. So this is something which, if it's avoided, you can have better cohesion. We must remember that while you may not be visible in certain areas where you are providing help, it is the quality and the timely help which is more important, rather than size and visibility and other things. Also, one must keep in mind, the assistance that you're providing is something that has been asked for. You should not be duplicating the efforts which are already existing there. You should just add on to that effort, or you should provide effort in areas which are deficient and which need help in. Towards this end, it is very important that the recipient country puts out very quickly as to what it needs, and more importantly, what it doesn't need. For example, in the recent year before last, I think, or last year, the Indonesian tsunami that was there. Within 24 hours, Indonesia had put out on the AHA website as to what all they need as help from other countries. And very specifically, they had put out, what they don't need. For example, they said, we don't need any food items. That is something which is, in any disaster, first thing that comes to mind of various NGOs and various donors, that let's send food items and clothing and all. So they had put out very clearly that don't give us water, we are self-sufficient, don't give us food, we are okay with it. And what we need is, they had put out things like medicines, tentage, generators, power equipment and all, and that is what was provided by a country also. So this is very important. Also, the response phase has a limited shelf life. The phase is short-lived, so you must know when to disengage. After a while, these various teams that congregate in the international, in the recipient country, become a burden to the country that is hosting you. So you should know that your role is over. Now you should move on. And like we always say that, response is a phase of disaster management, but also what is important is rehab and reconstruction. Let us try and contribute to these areas also. It is important to remember that in the early phases of disaster, the disaster-stricken country depletes most of its resources. By that time, the international interest is also waning. Whatever mileage most people, most non-serious players have drawn their mileage out of the whole thing, and then only serious players are left over. So it is very important for successful relief programs to be effective in rehab and reconstruction also long time after the international interest has waned. I had tried to put together some thoughts in the short time of 10 minutes that I had to present to you. I hope you found them useful. Thank you very much. Over to you, Dr. Harjeet.
Thank you very much, sir. Crossing national boundaries and affecting whole region. Sir, there is one question for you. You mentioned about the international on-site rescue operation. Is there any mock drill that are conducted to improve coordination and cooperation, and how can community be a part of such operation?
Yeah. So like I said, that mock drills, rehearsals, joint exercises are very important to rehearse your drills and procedures in such aspects. And we have had a number of these exercises in the recent past, last 2-3 years, we have had a number of such exercises. And the community can participate through the community awareness programs that are conducted during these times. And communities are definitely the first responders in a disaster. So their effort also needs to be coordinated along with the teams that have come to provide you help. So definitely they have a very important role to play.
Sir, our Chief Guest Shri V. Muralidharan, Minister of State, External Affairs, has joined us. Now we start with our inaugural session. I would request Major General Manoj Kumar Bindal, Vasist Seva Medal, Executive Director, National Institute of Disaster Management, for his address. Over to you, sir.
Can you hear me, Dr. Harjeet?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. First of all, a very hearty welcome to all the participants who have joined this important webinar, and a special welcome to all the distinguished speakers in which Brigadier Ajay Gangwar has just given out the coordination and response issues, practical aspects as the first address. And we are waiting to hear from Shri Pradeep Kumar, who's IAS Managing Director from Odisha SDMA, and then from the DDMA we have from Meghalaya Srimati the K Warning, and from civil society organizations we have Shri Mihir Bharji, who's founder and director of AIDMII, and of course Professor Surya Prakash from NIDM, who will give perspective from the government. We are very fortunate that we have a very mix of speakers, and we have Shri GVV Sharma ji, Member Secretary from NDMA, who's spearheading this whole 10-point agenda series of webinars with NIDM, 10 of them, out of which this is item number 10 of the PM 10-point agenda, which talks about bringing about greater cohesion in international response to disasters. And we are just waiting for General Atta Hasnain, member NDMA, to join us. He himself has been involved in large number of humanitarian actions across the globe, and we will be we are delighted that he'll be coming and giving us a special address. And most importantly, the commitment of the government is seen that Mr. V. Muralidharan, Honorable Minister of State of External Affairs, has joined us today, because this itself shows that India's commitment towards international response and bringing aid and helping other countries to deal with the disaster effects is topmost, as one of the topmost priorities of the Indian government. And hence the Minister of State has himself joined during his busy schedule at this point of the year to address the gathering. We are all aware that most of the world regions are prone to multiple disasters. And in case of a disaster event, the best country to respond is either the neighborhood or someone who's very close to not my immediate neighborhood, but beyond that. And the disasters are also transboundary in nature in many cases, like we have in our case the Kosi and Gandak River. Wherever they overflow, our East Bihar, those 7 districts get flooded. So there is and plus similarly in our case, whenever any flooding happens in North Bengal, Bengal area or Assam area, Bangladesh gets affected, or like Myanmar gets affected. So like this, there are numerous examples in the world where disasters are transboundary in nature, and what better example than the present pandemic, where 210 countries are affected, and there's not even a single individual who's been spared. But 2015 earthquake of Nepal has set an example where the country's capacity was limited because the devastation and the ferocity earthquake was so much, and the hence it required international response. And that time the way the international response came was unprecedented. And India was the first country, which was spoken about by Brigadier Gangwar also, and Honorable Minister would also be referring to it, that we were the first country to reach there within 6 hours, which is unprecedented in the history of international response. So this itself shows that we are making India ready for helping out others. In addition to that, Dr. Mrityunjay, in all his lectures, he keeps telling us, who's director IMD, India Meteorological Department, how we have opened our, expanded our horizon of cyclone and disaster management related warnings and early warning and dissemination, which includes all the neighboring countries. And it is so accurate that large number of countries have now turned to India's early warning system, India's websites, to get a better update than other agencies which are in the field. Now, what happens, we are all aware that there are simultaneous responses which are stimulated, which is both by self-organizing people, voluntary groups, individuals from inside and outside the disaster-affected areas. But it is not enough that they are able to cater for that. So when we talk about complementarity of the efforts that comes in from across the borders, there it needs to take in all the capacities, local capacities that the government has, so that we do not duplicate the efforts. There's no wastage of resources. Example was given by Brigadier Gangwar in the morning, wherein he spoke about Indonesia tsunami, that within 24 hours on their website, they told what help they require and what help they don't require. Like they don't require food, they don't require water, that they have enough. So immediately the first response is of a responder is to get food and water to the people. So instead of that, a quality of response became better because the right needs were addressed. So rapid needs assessment by the donor country is very, very important. And I fully agree with Brigadier Gangwar when he said this. There are a lot of protocol issues which are there during any international response, even while giving or while accepting. Now that sometimes puts a dampener into the speed of the process. And hence, that is an area where we need to work more and more, that during a disaster, doors are opened immediately and we are able to provide succor to the affected community at the fastest possible time. I will not say much because I'm keen to hear all the speakers and especially our esteemed speakers for the inaugural session. Thank you so much. I once again welcome the Honorable Minister of State for External Affairs, Government of India, Shri M. V. Muralidharan ji, to this webinar, and Shri GVV Sharma ji, Member Secretary, NDMA. Thank you so much. Over to you, Dr. Harjeet.
Thank you very much, sir. Now I would request Lieutenant General Syed Ata Hasnain, Member, National Disaster Management Authority, recipient of Param Visis Seva Medal, Uttam Yuddh Seva Medal, Ati Visis Seva Medal, Sena Medal, Visis Seva Medal and Bar for his special address. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Harjeet. Thank you so much for having sent me this invitation. My compliments to the Honorable Minister of State for External Affairs, Muralidharan ji. We are very glad that you have been able to make it even after your journey. You are still linked with us. I think this is a phenomenal webinar which is taking place, something which one really looked forward to. International cooperation in any way is something which is very close to my heart, particularly. I've had field experience in the United Nations in two major missions, very, very difficult missions in the countries like Rwanda, Mozambique. And we have learned from that, we have realized from that how important is international cooperation when it comes to finding stability in places. And I dare say that I equate disaster very much with almost with war, because war ravages an area, leaves an area in people in absolutely as destitutes, and that leads to instability, which leads further to all kinds of violent movements and radicalized extremist movements. The similar thing happens with disaster-prone areas. If left to themselves, countries, nations, regions which are not strong enough, resilient enough, not economically advanced enough, not technically advanced enough, you will find the impact of disaster hazards will be phenomenal on these areas. And therefore, it automatically, if the international community does not come to its assistance of these areas, you will find a tremendous scope for the rise of instability in such areas. The whole idea about globalization is actually this. Globalization is nothing but the use of modern technology today. After 1989, it was realized that with greater networking which was taking place, the availability of this technology, it was possible to bring the world together, to not only in the issues of trade and monetary aspects, but also very much in terms of peacekeeping, peacemaking, and absolutely in the world of disaster management. And I think the Prime Minister, while chalking out his 10-point program in this 2016 Conference of the Asian Ministers, recognized this fact by actually giving this as the 10th point, which I consider as one of the most important points, the aspect of international cooperation in the field of disaster management. As you are all aware, in India, even as late as 2001, most of us were of the perception that disaster and disaster management is related to awaiting the next disaster and responding to it, to mitigate on the spot at that time the difficulties of the people or whatever. It is only after that and the period up to 2005, when we came into the Disaster Management Act of 2005, that this scientific approach started. We caught up with the rest of the world in a rather quick way, I would say. In 15 years, we have caught up with the rest of the world, because most of the world was otherwise looking at disaster management in terms of disaster risk and disaster risk management, rather than disaster risk reduction, rather than just the aspect of the management of a disaster and in terms of response. So we have come a long way in these 15 years, and I dare say that this is the actual way forward. I would say that in today's world, cooperation would be in two domains as far as disaster management is concerned. International cooperation is concerned. First is the aspect of risk reduction itself. and the application of technology, research, early warning, particularly in the field of technology, and capacity development. And the second domain is the actual response, which is a very, very important aspect to mitigate the effects of it. Both domains remain applicable to international cooperation. In the period up to a potential disaster, you have to have protocols laid out. Without international protocols, nothing really works. So the place of diplomacy is extremely important, and we are happy that the Minister of State of External Affairs is here, because this is a point we'd like to focus and emphasize, that diplomatically, in times well before disasters, the kind of protocols which can be established, whether they be bilateral, multilateral, or anything, will always be greatly helpful. Then you have to partner with different organizations. The United Nations being the umbrella organization, NGOs, various private players in this whole thing. Then with various technical players for joint research and on technology. And the most important part, the IEC aspect. The aspect of trying to bring a unified code within the disaster management community of the world through information, through the spread of information, through education, and through communication. Every nation will have its own systems, every nation will have its own ways of working, but interoperability, which is the key word here, interoperability will be the most important aspect, and that cannot be established on the spot when you respond to a disaster, because that will be a disaster by itself if you attempt to bring about interoperability at that time. What you have to work for is to ensure that under these protocols, we work out the systems and make sure that we train together to ensure a system of interoperability. The network today, the internet today, the World Wide Web today, facilitates this to such a great extent. The fact that we are a network at the moment and speaking to each other is itself a message which needs to be taken note of, that all this can be done internationally, and I dare say the NIDM is doing a great job in effecting this. In terms of responses, my experience and my remembrance of the history of international cooperation in terms of responses, I remember relations between nations have been created, established based on disaster cooperation. And I can think of no better example than the great cyclone of Bangladesh in 1990. At the end of the Gulf War I, when the Gulf War I was ending and the American Marines were going back to the United States. And I remember that one of the very large aircraft carriers, American aircraft carriers, was sailing through the Bay of Bengal when disaster struck in Bangladesh, and this aircraft carrier was diverted. And the Marines, unprepared, went in and helped Bangladesh to actually overcome this disaster. 1990, 30 years ago, the whole science of disaster management was still at its inception stages, I would say. And the kind of relationship that was established between Bangladesh and the United States at that time, people in Bangladesh have not forgotten it. I have visited Bangladesh many times, and I do remember how many times I've been reminded of the relationship which was established based upon the response of the United States Marines, particularly, who were there available to this particular disaster. There have been many other cases. You can also have very, very negative results sometimes. For example, Kashmir. The earthquake in Kashmir, you found that internationally the response was not as good. And particularly in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, where you had a greater effect of the earthquake, you found that the terrorist organizations actually went in for relief there. And that added to their value within POK and within Pakistan, because the international response was comparatively low-key. So there can be all kinds of examples. The tsunami, I think the tsunami of 2004 actually brought peace to Indonesia. You may be aware that this region of Aceh in Indonesia, which is very close to the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, which was the worst affected, they were absolutely devastated by the tsunami. It had a long-running militant movement which was running in this area. And post this, the disaster and the manner in which the international agencies led by India in a very big way went in for disaster management, for disaster risk reduction, or rather disaster relief in Aceh, actually contributed to the end of this militancy in Aceh. So there can be a lot of achievements from this kind of cooperation and activity which can happen. Who needs to? We need to remember the Thailand cave rescue, which has happened 2 years ago, or maybe a year and a half ago. Could those children have been saved from the cave in Thailand with the technology which was locally available? Absolutely not. Finally, there were experts who came in from the UK, who came from Australia, New Zealand, all over the world, and that's how finally those children were rescued. We also have to look at the potential of man-made disasters, CBRN kind of threats that we have, oil fires that we have, shipwrecks. I think the latest reminder is Lebanon. We've seen what has happened in the warehouse of Lebanon, how it has devastated that country, and India has also contributed somewhat to the aspect of relief work there. But France has stepped in a very, very big way to ensure disaster relief. So this, I would end in the end by giving a couple of principles. I would say the absolute necessity of joint training in the lead up to potential disasters, the aspect of interoperability built into the joint training, the aspect of communication, again, built into the interoperability part of it. Warning and information, which is the IMD's core task, is cooperation with different agencies, but this is the lifeline on which most disaster relief will actually depend. The aspect of command and control of the forces which go in. It is not just relief agencies which are going in. There are lots of other people. There are diplomats going in. There are managers going in. There are communicators going in. There are researchers going in. All of them need to be put under some sort of a command and control in these situations. Then the setting up of staging areas, the very important aspect of security, hygiene, medical relief, and of course the continuity of flow of aid, which makes otherwise what normally happens is aid tends to start fading off in a matter of 4, 5, 6, 7 days. It's important to ensure the coordination of the continuation of aid. At the end, the last word, I would say, I think the biggest contribution that India can make in this is institutional. The NIDM, for example, can be a center of excellence. The NDRF, the center of excellence in terms of being the core group for international disaster response as far as India is concerned. High quality literature be developed by the NIDM, which can be put out online at all times. And the Center for Lessons Learned in the NIDM, which must act like a repository of all disasters worldwide, not just the experience of Indian disaster management. And lastly, I think the turnout, labeling, and quality of conduct in the international environment in anywhere where India is involved. Recently, the NDRF has set up an excellent example by the work that it has done, both for Nepal and for Lebanon. I will end there and thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, sir. Now I would request Sri GVV Sharma, Member Secretary, National Disaster Management Authority, Ministry of Home Affairs, Government of India, for his keynote address to encourage and enlighten our participants with his vast experience and knowledge. Over to you, sir.
Good morning. Honorable Minister Sri V. Muralidharan ji, General Hasnain, my colleague member NDMA, Major General Bindal, Mr. Mihir Bhatt, the esteemed panelists and participants. I would like to begin by stating that the United Nations General Assembly had adopted a resolution which is called Resolution number 57 of 150 in February 2003 regarding strengthening the effectiveness and coordination of international urban search and rescue assistance. And there is an organization which has been created under UNDRR called INSARAG. The INSARAG makes the necessary protocols for international search and rescue missions, especially in the context of collapsed building structures and earthquakes. India has not yet become a member of the qualified IEC team of INSARAG, but as many of the participants may be aware, the National Disaster Response Force has made innumerable contributions in the world situations, and including one of the most important engagements of NDRF abroad was the experience of Fukushima triple disaster in Japan. Similarly, in Nepal earthquake of 2015 also, NDRF has played a very, very important role. I would like to mention that one of the beginnings of the important engagement for international cooperation would be through sharing of proper scientific information through early warning systems. In this context, I would like to mention that the Indian National Center for Ocean Information Services, that is INCOIS, in Hyderabad, has a developed state-of-the-art facility called Indian Tsunami Early Warning Center. It provides early warning to 22 countries of the Indian Ocean Rim. And it is also a matter to be known that our India Meteorological Department also provides up-to-date information, timely information regarding tropical cyclones to 13 countries. Apart from this, in terms of sharing information on rainfall, on thunderstorm, etc., the IMD has partnership with different South Asian countries. There is a program of IMD called South Asia Flash Flood Guidance. There also a lot of cooperation is happening across the world. In the context of response, we have to take into consideration 5 important considerations. One is the quality of the product. Whatever is the material that is sent, it has to be of high quality and it has to be acceptable to the disaster victims. Second, as Brigadier Gangwar has mentioned in his presentation, it has to be as per the need. It cannot be just because we have something, so we will send. It is not like that. It is because something is needed for the community, therefore it is sent. Then the third point is we should have very clear-cut packaging, which should be done in a proper manner, and we should have proper branding. Branding should be done correctly so that the communities are aware of which country is sending what and what kind of material is being sent in what form. And one of the most important points to be noted is the participating team, which is going from abroad, should know what are the cultural sensibilities of the host country. The cultural aspects are very, very important. And what we have learned from the Fukushima experience of NDRF is that the NDRF team have developed a system where, unfortunately, some people could not be saved. But when the dead body is retrieved from the rubble, the NDRF developed a system where the dead body is handed over to the family members in a dignified manner with proper decorum. So that gesture made by NDRF is appreciated even now by the Japanese authorities, and every year, even now, there is an event which commemorates the contribution of Indian force during the Fukushima triple disaster. So therefore, the cultural aspects are extremely important. Then another point I would like to mention is that for promoting resilience, there is a need for exchange of information, exchange of standards and protocols among different countries on technical configurations, whether it is for bridges or whether it is for towers or communication infrastructure, etc. And I would also like to mention that India already has a number of multilateral agreements as well as bilateral agreements. India has agreement for disaster management with the SAARC countries, for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization also, and then we have bilateral agreements with Japan, Germany, India, Russia, Switzerland, and Mongolia, among other countries. So what is important is that we have to engage and we have to continue the engagement and dialogue with these agencies through regular exercises and continue to develop expertise in terms of international cooperation. And there is one question which sometimes many participants may have in their minds, that is regarding whether India will accept international assistance during disasters. I would like to take this opportunity to say that the official policy of the government is that Government of India does not issue any appeal for foreign assistance in the wake of a disaster. However, if the national government of another country voluntarily offers assistance as a goodwill gesture in solidarity with the disaster victims, the decision on acceptance of all such offers will be made on a case-to-case basis by the Government of India. So therefore, there are protocols, there are systems where the international cooperation is extended, and it is necessary that we take our experience, our domestic experience, the way in which we have developed institutional capabilities and our expertise in terms of strengthening expert organization like National Disaster Response Force. All these experience should inform in more effective role for India participating in aid of other countries. With these words, I thank the Executive Director, NIDM, and his team for having organized this very good session with more than 620 participants. And I also thank him for having given me this opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Greater international collaboration management, important step in helping affected people, country by deliver our services. Now I would request our chief guest, Shri V. Muralidharan, Minister of State, External Affairs, Ministry of External Affairs, to deliver his inaugural address and enlighten our participants. Over to you, sir.
Sri GBV Sharma, Member Secretary, National Disaster Management Authority, Lieutenant General Syed Atta Hasnain, Member, National Disaster Management Authority, Major General M.K. Bindal, Executive Director, National Institute of Disaster Management, Professor Surya Prakash, National Institute of Disaster Management, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, namaskaram and good morning to all of you. As it has been mentioned, in fact, this pandemic has thrown up a lot of challenges. But at the same time, this pandemic also has created new avenues. It has thrown up a lot of new avenues and opportunities. And I'm utilizing one of those opportunities. So otherwise, if I had not been in Delhi, it would not have been possible for me to attend this program. In spite of the fact that I had to travel back to Kerala, my home state. And I'm joining all of you sitting at the Kochi International Airport, and perhaps the only airport in the country powered by solar power. So I am sitting in the Kochi airport and joining you, because this topic is a very significant topic, and especially because it is part of the 10-point agenda that has been proposed by the Honorable Prime Minister for disaster risk reduction. So it's a great honor for me to be invited to deliver the inaugural address of this webinar titled Bringing About Greater Cohesion in International Response to Disasters. Let me compliment the National Institute of Disaster Management for organizing this. And I see the number of participants also a great number, more than 600 people are participating this at this point of time. Honorable Prime Minister had outlined this agenda at the Asian Ministerial Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction held in New Delhi in November 2016. The agenda builds on the Sendai Framework for Disaster Reduction 2015 to 2030. The Sendai Framework works hand in hand with other 2030 agenda agreements, including the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, the Addis Ababa Action Agenda on Financing for Development, the New Urban Agenda, and the Sustainable Development Goals. As you are aware, the Sendai Framework recognizes that the state has the primary role to reduce disaster risk, but that responsibility should be shared with other stakeholders, including local governments, the private sector, and other stakeholders. Keeping in line with that thought process, Prime Minister's 10-point agenda aims to bring in involvement and leadership of women also. It also aims to develop a network of universities to work on disaster issues, as well as leverage social media and technology in all aspects of disaster management. The theme of this webinar go further beyond the vision of the Sendai Framework and envisage bringing about greater cohesion in international response to disasters. Ladies and gentlemen, we believe in a world where natural disasters do not respect national borders, as it has been quoted by many of the speakers who spoke before me, including the Bangladesh disaster, which General Hussain has mentioned just now. We have definitely not forgotten the Indian Ocean tsunami of 2004. He mentioned that also. It was triggered by an earthquake off the west coast of Sumatra in Indonesia. The tsunami traveled more than 5,000 kilometers across the open ocean and struck the east coast of Somalia. It destroyed lives and property all along its way. The world came together as one in providing relief to the affected people. India, as the first responder in combating disasters, has mobilized its naval resources several times in the past to support other countries in the Indian Ocean region. With multi-dimensional initiatives and expertise, India is taking a leading role in strengthening regional cooperation among South Asian countries for reducing disasters. India is one of the participating countries and work closely with the United Nations International Strategy for Disaster Reduction. India has been working closely with many countries for the exchange of ideas and expertise in disaster management. India's flagship agency for disaster management, the National Disaster Management Authority, was founded in 2005. In the recent past, it has established cooperation with its counterpart agencies in various countries such as Russia, Germany, Japan, Indonesia, and with multilateral groupings such as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. India hosted the first annual disaster management exercise for the BIMSTEC countries, the Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation. On October 10 to 13th, 2017 in New Delhi. India also hosted the Shanghai Cooperation Organization joint exercise on urban earthquake search and rescue on 4th November 2019 in New Delhi. As we see greater cohesion in our international response to disaster, it is time that we go beyond responding and towards achieving greater cohesion and international collaboration in enhancing disaster risk reduction. And ladies and gentlemen, it is with this goal that Honorable Prime Minister Sri Narendra Modi ji announced the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, or the CDRI, at the UN Climate Action Summit in September 2019. It's envisaged as a global partnership that aims to promote resilience of new and existing infrastructure systems to climate and disaster risks. The CDRI focuses as much on reducing the risk of disaster as it does on relief. As we are aware, in the aftermath of a natural disaster, communities incur greater losses over time during the prolonged process of resettlement and rehabilitation. Keeping this in mind, CDRI envisions enabling measurable reduction in infrastructure losses from disasters, including extreme and CDRI looks at future. Disaster resilient infrastructure would help hasten the process of resettlement and return to normalcy. The CDRI is the culmination of a process of consultations with more than 35 countries. It looks at expanding universal access to basic services and enabling prosperity as enshrined in the Sustainable Development Goals, while also working at the intersection of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction and the Paris Climate Agreement. CDRI will conduct country-specific and global activities. It will serve as a platform for generating and exchanging knowledge and thereby provide member countries technical support and capacity development, research and knowledge management, and advocacy and partnerships to facilitate and encourage investment in disaster resilient infrastructure systems. As of September 2020, that is this month, as of now, 16 countries are members of CDRI. In addition to member states, CDRI has the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, the United Nations Development Program, the World Bank, and the Asian Development Bank as its knowledge and development partners. Given our vulnerabilities to the vagaries of the changing climate, it's pertinent that we come together on building a future that is resilient to climate change. As we work towards building partnerships within our countries at the local and regional levels, it's also important for us to come together at the global level, exchange ideas and best practices, and use them for a safer and shared future. I once again take this opportunity to congratulate the National Institute of Disaster Management and National Disaster Management Authority for organizing this seminar at a time when the CDRI, that is the Coalition on Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, completes its first anniversary. Thanking you all for the attention.
Thank you very much, sir, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to talk about the international collaboration in disaster risk reduction. We are very fortunate to have with us, sir. Now, I would like to call upon Mr. Raju Thapa, young professional NIDM, for his vote of thanks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Privilege to be asked to propose a vote of thanks on this very important occasion. I, on behalf of National Institute of Disaster Management, extend my sincere gratitude to our chief guest, Sri V. Muralidharan, Minister of State External Affairs, Ministry of External Affairs, for sparing his precious time from his busy schedule for providing encouragement and support to all of us. We are also very grateful to Sri GVV Sharma, Member Secretary, National Disaster Management Authority, Lieutenant General Syed Atta Hasnain, Member, National Disaster Management Authority, recipient of Param Visesh Seva Medal, Uttam Yudh Seva Medal, Ati Visesh Seva Medal, Sena Medal, Visesh Seva Medal, and BARS for accepting our invitation and sparing their precious time to share their vast experience and knowledge with us. I would like to extend very special thanks to our distinguished speaker, Brigadier Ajay Gangwar, Advisor, NDMA, Sri Pradeep Kumar Jina, IAS, Managing Director, OSDMA, Sri K. Wangyong, DDMA from Meghalaya, Sri Mihir Bhatt, Founder and Director, All India Disaster Mitigation Institute, and Professor Surya Prakash, Head, GMR Division, NIDM, who will be enlightening our participant with their vast knowledge and experience. And also, I would like to extend a very special thanks to Major General Manoj Kumar Bindal, Visesh Seva Medal, Executive Director, National Institute of Disaster Management, for providing innovative and encouraging environment, moral guidance, continuous enthusiasm and valuable suggestion throughout NIDM endeavors. I also express my deep sense of appreciation to Professor Surya Prakash, Head GMR Division, who is the coordinator of this webinar, for organizing such a webinar for dissemination of information and knowledge, and also encouraging us to excel in our efforts. I hope all the participants have some key takeaway points from this webinar, and we also hope that they will discuss with their colleagues, with their families, which will further disseminate the knowledge and information that they have gathered during this webinar. Thank you very much. Namaskar. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Raju. With that, we have come to end of our inaugural session. Now moving on the technical session, we have senior level resource person, experts, professional and functionaries who have very long and meaningful experience with the vast knowledge on the subject. I welcome all the distinguished speakers, participants who have joined us via Cisco WebEx platform, and several others who are watching us live in YouTube. Your active participation is important throughout the session. You can enter your questions and in the Q&A box, and we will have question answer session at the end of the webinar after all the presentation for the distinguished speakers are over. Now moving ahead with our presentation, Sri Pradeep Kumar Jenna, IS Managing Director, Odisha State Disaster Management Authority. I would request Sri Pradeep Kumar Jenna to take on stage. To you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Harjit. I believe I am audible to all of you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my views on the need and the type of international cooperation that would be required for disaster management. We had an excellent inaugural session where we got a good overview of the nature of support that would be required, and particularly Major General Brigadier Gangwar has explained in detail about the response actions in an international disaster situation. Lieutenant General Hasnan has given a beautiful overview of international cooperation in both disaster risk reduction as well as in response. So also the Honorable Minister as well as Mr. GVB Sharma, Member Secretary, NDMA. Coming from a state's perspective, I would like to share a few of the things under 5 heads. Since time is limited, I would not give a lot of introduction. But yes, climate change is becoming a real problem when it comes to disasters. The frequency and intensity of disasters, climate-induced disasters, are increasing, and increasing with this ferocious imprints on the landmass and its people. Coming to Odisha is a good example. In the last 20 years, we have seen 7 major cyclones. The first major cyclone being 99 super cyclone. Then 2013 we had another major cyclone, and between 2013 to 2020 we have seen 6 cyclones. And in the last 12 months, means from May 2019 to May 2020, we have seen 3 cyclones, 2 being summer cyclones, and one everybody knows what impact it had, adverse impact it had on Odisha. That was Cyclone Fani last year, the scale of devastation that it inflicted on Odisha. And this year Amphan, which affected both Odisha and West Bengal, and we know what sort of devastation that has taken place in West Bengal. So climate-induced disasters, their number is increasing, their intensity is increasing, and it is bound to increase further. So there is thus a need for better understanding of the climate change actions and its impact on disasters, and that way on various countries. In macro level, there is a lot of studies, a lot of data, a lot of research findings available on climate change. But when it comes to micro level, at the village level, at the community level, at the subnational level, the understanding of climate change and its impact is not very well understood. So therefore, my first request would be that there is an urgent need for developing good international cooperation in understanding the nuances of the climate change at local level, and then help the local administrations and subnational administrations and governments to understand and develop actions to mitigate the adverse impacts of climate change. So here, the other thing that comes is that predict some technology about climate change actions. As we have seen that IMD has been very fantastic, fabulous in predicting cyclones. In fact, it has proved itself to be much better than JTWC and other European weather forecasters. And INCOIS is now emerging as another good agency for tsunami-related things. But still, there are issues of climate change impacts, particularly on sea level rise, coastal erosion, coastal flooding. So, and there is not much of understanding yet developed. So there is therefore need for developing better technological understanding of climate change impacts on various nation states and at subnational level. So that there, I would like a lot of international cooperation of research institutions, multilateral and UN agencies, who can work with national and subnational agencies in developing better understanding of the catastrophes that might emerge and what sort of actions that will be required to reduce the associated risks. Particularly at the state and subnational levels, the technical capacity is very limited in understanding the warnings, the understanding the early signatures, and also when it comes to modeling, the capacity is still limited. So there is a need for national and supranational agencies to work with subnational agencies to improve their capacity in terms of technology, in terms of management and governance when it comes to climate change induced disasters. That is the first area of concern which possibly would be required to be addressed. Then coming to the second part where things have been told is regarding the response forces. Yes, we have NDRF, many states have their state disaster response forces, but are we following the global standards, global protocols, as has been explained in SARAG sort of protocols, or are our forces capable enough to act in a cohesive manner with international forces when it comes to participating in joint international disaster rescue and response operations? So therefore, there is a need for developing international, whatever good practices are there, internationally, globally accepted good practices. We need to develop those SOPs, develop the skill set of our forces, response forces, and also use those technologies and equipments which are elsewhere used so that we can ourselves benefit by within the country, the forces and help another state in distress and can join hands with NDRF and work together. And if required, national NDRF along with other state forces can also join any international disaster rescue and relief operations. That is the second area where there is, I believe, there is a lot more required to be done. Third area is, that is what in the states we face, is the post-disaster. Damage assessment is a big concern, because the moment, fortunately, in last several years, India as a country and Odisha as a state, we have demonstrated how effective we can be when it comes to saving lives in terms of our search and rescue operations and our immediate relief operations. But post that immediate phase, when it comes to damage assessment, we adopt a lot of manual systems and processes. So can we get better technologies better practices available elsewhere in the world and adopt those things to minimize dispersals, quicken the process of damage assessment, and thereafter disburse whatever assistance is required to be given to the disaster affected population. So technology in damage and loss assessment would be another area where possibly there would be a lot of support required. And the next thing is disaster management knowledge. Lieutenant General Atta Hasnain has talked about capacity development and institutional reforms, institutional strengthening of national and subnational agencies. Yes, that is very essential. So, can we collaborate with international agencies under the aegis of maybe UN and multilateral agencies? Universities, academic institutions, and research institutions to work together to understand various aspects of DRR and prepare ourselves in following adaptive as well as mitigative measures for minimizing the adverse impacts. So, the way we are now talking of CDRI, Coalition for Disaster Risk Resilient Infrastructure. Can we use similar platform to build the capacity of the state disaster management institutions, organizations, and down below at the district level, so that the organizational effectiveness increases? And Odisha can be a good example because post-1999 super cyclone, with the help of World Bank and DFID, this was the first state to come up with a state disaster management organization, learning from the better practices elsewhere in the world. Similarly, we are the first state to come up with a designated specialized disaster response force, ODRAF, and which is doing quite well. And I can say it's not as good as NDRF, but it is a close second to NDRF when it comes to its effectiveness and capabilities. So, similarly, recently Odisha has, many of the participants may be knowing that 2 of the villages of Odisha have been identified as or certified as tsunami ready villages in the whole of the Indian Ocean region. And that has been possible because of UNESCO and its partner agencies, along with INCOIS, working with the government of Odisha, and we in OSDMA partnering with these international agencies, learned from them, adopted those practices and recommendations and standard operating procedures, and today 2 of our villages have been declared tsunami ready. Doesn't mean that tsunami will not damage them, but they can take care of the situation much better than the other communities. And because of this, now learning from these examples and going through last 1 year of practicing in 2 villages, now we have decided that in next 12 months, we will make all our balanced 326 villages within 3 kilometers of the coast, we will make them tsunami ready. So basically, learning from others, getting good training from experts from international and national level can build the capacity of the state agencies to respond to situations better. Maybe since we are running short of time, I would stop here and would like, if there are any queries, I would be happy to respond. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Sir rightly mentioned about increase in frequency of natural disaster due to climate change. Collaboration of DRR between national government is less common. Disasters may raise tension between states. The sudden release of buildup of flood water from dams in one country can cause severe flooding in a neighboring state downstream. In South Asia, where large river systems cross national borders, dispute over water use have hindered the establishment of regional flood forecasting and warning systems. Concern is growing about the possibility of water wars between states as environmental destruction, population growth, climate change combine to make water scarce in already dry region. So there is one question raised by Shri Vijay. OSDMA is doing a exemplary action in disaster risk reduction and resilience. What is the role of local NGOs and youth associations? And are there any government rules applicable to them to follow the guidelines to support in disaster time?
Okay. So in fact, as you know, post super cyclone, in fact, the UNDP-led disaster risk management program was implemented in Odisha in more than 26,000 villages, where we are preparing village disaster management plans, and then we are building the capacity of the local community in terms of search and rescue ability, in terms of first aid, in terms of other associated things. And the government itself cannot launch such a massive disaster risk management program on its own without the help of NGOs and civil societies. In fact, now we are doing the second round of VDNT now. In fact, tomorrow I am having a video-based interaction with few of the civil societies as to how do we link VDNT with Gram Panchayat disaster management plan and gradually link it with the state disaster management plans. So NGOs would be an asset for any government when it comes to disaster, but there are a lot of difficult relationship issues sometimes between the government agencies at local level and civil societies. So managing this relationship is very crucial, and that would require better standard operating procedures, better leadership at the state and say SDMA level, where these friction points can be managed, mediated, the money moderated, then only the effectiveness of geo-NGO coordination improves. That is still a challenge, not only in Odisha, anywhere in the country. Still lot more of work is required, and that is what I have also experienced in this COVID-19 pandemic. Many NGOs have done excellent work, while the local district administration, the collectors are little pro civil society, pro NGO, excellent cooperation has come and we have got excellent results. And sometimes somewhere some district magistrates may not be that keen to involve NGOs and civil societies. We have seen some bitter issues also. So this is going to continue, but gradually we need to work out good standard operating procedures so that both sides respect each other, doesn't cross the boundary lines and maintain a cordial relationship, then only the results should be better. That is my own understanding, and that is what we are trying to practice. So maybe still we have not achieved the best of result, but in Odisha still I would say our NGOs do a fabulous work in supporting OSDMA and the district disaster management authorities at the time of crisis, particularly supporting the most critically vulnerable communities.
True, sir. Thank you very much, sir. For our next presentation, we have with us Srimati K. Wanyang, District Disaster Management Officer, Ri-Bhoi District, Meghalaya. Over to you, ma'am.
Is my presentation visible, Dr. Harjit?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Very good afternoon to everyone. And first of all, I would like to thank NIDM, Sir Surya ji, and especially Dr. Harjit ji for inviting me to be a part of this program and the opportunity given to me on this platform in the presence of all dignitaries, Honorable Minister of States for External Affairs, Government of India, respected members of NDLA, NIDM, all the distinguished speakers, and all the disaster managers across all states. As already mentioned in the introduction, about to bring about greater cohesion in international response to disasters is one of the 10-point agenda of the Honorable Prime Minister, which is in coherence with the Sendai Framework on Disaster Risk Reduction, which we can see in the targets number 6 to enhance international cooperation, and of course the SDGs, the goal number 7, it says about the partnership for the goals and of course the Paris Agreement on climate change. So this point, the point number 10, is one of the most important aspects of disaster management, because it is very difficult to manage disasters by one single agency. And to achieve these goals, we need partnerships. We need partnerships from all the organizations, agencies. We need all stakeholders coming together to fight for it. And I think everyone has already given the example of this COVID-19 pandemic, and how as we have experience in our district too, that we cannot manage this without the support of everyone, like from different departments, different organizations, the community, especially the community and the volunteers. And if I look at all the 10 points of the Honorable Prime Minister, all the points are interrelated to each other, whereby all the agencies, whether it is the developmental sectors, business sectors, social sectors, technology, educational sectors, and NGO sectors, they play a very important role towards DRR. And thereby all these sectors itself are partners in the DRR efforts. Of course, these are the Honorable Prime Minister's 10-point agenda. I don't need to speak much on this. We are all aware of the 10 points agenda. And coming back to the agenda of today's webinar, and some of the keys action of this point for international response are, I think Sir Sarma has already mentioned about this, that we are yet to take steps to become a certified member of International Search and Rescue Advisory Group, that is INSARAG, in order to be able to participate in international urban search and rescue operation. Of course, of course, India has already participated in the Nepal operations and other countries as well. Then secondly is engage with international cooperation to support post-disaster recovery. Of course, these are at a very high level with all strict, protocols. But my main presentation, my main presentation is actually sharing of experience in coordination with organization at the district level, or from the point of view of district disaster management authority. As the at the district level, it is the focal point for implementation of disaster management or for disaster risk reduction. As we know, strengthening coordination with NGOs, the private sectors, and civil society is one of the activities of DRR program. And taking the example of our state, Meghalaya, is also vulnerable to multi-hazards, whether it is earthquake, whether it is flood, whether it is strong winds, landslides. So during our implementation of our Government of India UNDP DRR project in 2011 and 12, when I was in East Cassidy's district Shillong, whereby we implemented the DRR project in our 2 blocks, and at the district level, we focus mainly on the training and capacity building of these organizations, where we awareness generation, and secondly, which is a very important, which we have implemented, is the formation of an IAG, that is inter-agency group under the chairmanship of the Deputy Commissioner. And all these NGOs are working in different fields, including church-based organization, which mainly for disaster response and DRR. Some of these organizations I just mentioned from our states, North Nepal, All Saints Church, Impulse NGO, Women for Integrated Sustainable Empowerment, New Hope Center, Social Service Center. So all these NGOs coming together under this interagency group under the chairmanship of the Deputy Commissioner. And then, of course, at present, in my present district, in Mumbai district, this interagency group, or maybe we can call it as a NGO coordination group. The formation of this is in the process, and because of this COVID-19 situation, we got delayed. But however, this does not stop us here, and our district being one of the aspirational districts, we took the opportunity by bringing together the NGOs, CBOs registered with Darpan portal of NITI Aayog, Government of India. And there are about 19 to 20 NGOs, CBOs working in different sectors and areas, whether it is livelihood, whether it is for women welfare, whether it is for disability, farmers, and again, I'm saying church-based organizations because we have many church-based organizations here too. And for this, let me take again example of this COVID-19 situation again. And for this COVID-19 situation, a district level committee was constituted on the 17th of April 2020, comprising of all these NGOs registered with NITI Aayog. And the roles and responsibilities of this committee is actually to assist and support the district administration, to supplement the efforts of the state government to provide shelters to homeless, migrants, etc., to create awareness on about COVID-19 safety measures, the need for social distancing, wearing of masks, use of sanitizers, frequent hand washing, and very important is behavioral change management. They also made a commitment to provide volunteers, counselors, wherever we required or we need, and also ensuring that no stigma and discrimination against any COVID patients. I just would like to also mention some of the organizations and their commitments in their area of operations. In the case of the Noble Women's Self-Help Group, Grassroots Empowerment Mission Society, their commitments are to provide counselors, awareness, and distribution of PPEs. And in the case of Northeast India Christian Mission, provide awareness, again, distribution of essential commodities, food to people affected by this COVID. And the next organization is Ferrando Speech and Hearing Center, which is working for disability, the needs of disability, then provide again trauma counseling. So these are just a few examples of few organizations that I'm sharing. And which is a very short presentation. And before this is actually the committee which we formed for the COVID-19 situation, comprising of all the NGOs under the chairmanship of Madam DC. And before I end my presentation, I would like to quote from Dalai Lama's that, it is our collective responsibility and individual responsibility to preserve and tend to the world in which we all live. Unquote. And for me, it goes the same whether it is for environment or it is for disaster management, it is for disaster risk reduction efforts, and and it should be a collective efforts to bring about resilience and to build back better. And I believe that through these interactions and sharing of experiences. It will help all of us DM Malaysians and work better under one umbrella, whether it is internationally, nationally, locally, for the welfare of the people and the country. Last but not least, I would like to request the NDMA and NIDM to also guide us how to go forward to bring about effective cohesion in response and recovery at the district level. So with these few words, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity. Over to you, Dr. Harjit.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Ma'am enlightened our participant about the DDMA Meghalaya and highlighted about the constitution of district level committee for COVID-19 measures. Ma'am, there is one question for you. Yeah. Is it good to have hazard, risk, vulnerability and capacity analysis map with every village and need to update at least once in a 6 month, reviewed by PRI and local NGOs and village level committee? Are we giving priority for this to reduce risk?
Yes, actually, risk analysis is very important. And here in Meghalaya, we have the village disaster management plan, where we also have the village disaster management committee, where the headman is the chairman or chairperson of that committee. And it is very important to have a risk analysis at the village level. And it is also very important to, update it every 6 months. And in our states, we are going through that process, like where updating should be done every 6 months. And if not 6 months, at least every year they should update the village disaster management plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am, to be with us. Now moving ahead with our program, now I would like to request Sri Mihir Bhatt, founder and director, All India Disaster Mitigation Institute, to kindly take on stage. Over to you, sir.
Can you hear me now? I'm unmuted.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you so much. No, what a pleasure it is to be part of this final and most important, perhaps, 10-point program. And I couldn't have had a better background in terms of Ms. Banyang presenting from Meghalaya district, Kumno, and Gina Sab, you giving such a good background from Orissa experience, which has been always at the center of what is happening as far as disaster risk reduction is concerned in India since Orissa cyclone, even before that. GVS Sharma Sahab very aptly underlined the various ongoing engagements that we have. And Sir Ata Hussain, sir, also underlined how internationally we are engaged in terms of various disaster response. Tsunami was one that he underlined in terms of how it also changes the relationship between our engagement. And Bindalji, you very clearly pointed out the role that NIDM has been playing and will be playing in future, especially what is proposed as Central of Lessons Learned that that was proposed. And of course, Gangwaji, you explained very good background of how things are working in terms of ways of being engaged. So that way we have a very full picture about how this international engagement takes place. I wanted to start with first mentioning what are the terms of this engagement, under what conditions or with what objectives we engage. And we have a wide range of objectives with these various engagements, but maybe a time has come for us to look at these terms of engagement a bit more differently than it has been seen so far. Especially, we have a very nice book, some of you may be aware of, which is called The Indian Way, about how India engages with the rest of the world. And I think that is something I'm taking as a background since I was asked to speak at this particular forum. And I'm also taking the background of the way India has been engaging and see what are these sort of terms or principles of engagement that is taking that we should be keeping in mind. The first and most important part of that engagement is that it has to be two ways, that we as India get engaged also as much as the international community or any specific country engages with us. So it's on a footing where both who are engaged in this particular relationship are equal and central to each other. And that's something we should underline even more than we have done in the past, may it be UN agencies, may it be any other country. So that's the first part of engagement. The second terms of engagement, if we take the current thinking of the government of India in terms of how we look at the rest of the world and our place within that, is that the engagement should not only be hierarchical, which we've seen for a long time, around last 60, 70 years since independence, but we should also balance that equally with the lateral engagement. So not only vertical engagement with various bodies and various mechanisms that we have, but also the lateral engagement with the countries and mechanisms directly. And that is something very important if we want to go ahead and operationalize the way we think India should be engaged in the global world as far as disaster risk reduction is concerned. The third important part of terms of engagement is that we should be playing a transformative role in our engagement. So at the end of the engagement, we don't come back, and those we are engaged with don't come back where they are. Just don't want to recover and restore the status quo or restore the loss and damage, but we want that engagement to be a transformative engagement. That is that both parties or all parties in part of engagement actually come back far better prepared, far better aware of how to deal with disaster risk, far better aware how to operationalize humanitarian response. So that's the third way of engagement. The fourth engagement, way of engagement, is something that I would like to mention very much, that it has to be about include this engagement, the more focus on economic and ecological issues beyond humanitarian issues as well, because as it was explained by Hasninji, it is very difficult to separate these because the whole disaster risk is being globalized more and more, may it be floods or may it be the pandemic. So that's the fourth part. And the last part is a bit ambitious, but I think it's possible with NDMA and our NDRF and IDM, civil society jointly working towards that, that maybe India can act or try to achieve that kind of a role even greater than it has done so far, in terms of act as some sort of a lighthouse, in terms of giving direction about welcoming and pointing out dangers as far as international global engagement around disaster risk reductions are concerned. So these are the 4 or 5 ways of engagement, terms of engagement, that I think are very important and that I think will add to what we have discussed so far. Having said that, which is very general and broad, that I thought that was important for us to, let us come back to something very, very specific and something which is very urgent, something which is very overwhelming, where all of us are trying to find ways of performing better. And also we look at a long standing, something we will not be able to get away with for a long time, and that is the pandemic. So if we take pandemic as a case study, what are the areas where we should be engaging and how is something that I've done a very quick exercise for you to look at Of course, it's a rapid exercise. It needs to be done far better in a detailed manner. But I thought it would be very good to have something specific to look at. So I've seen what India is doing, what other countries are doing as far as the pandemic is concerned. And if we were to engage differently, far more effectively, what are the changes that are possible for us to look at? So keeping that in mind, I will give you examples of international engagement, the urgent priorities arising out of the pandemic impact. So the impact of pandemic that we are facing so far, what are the urgent priorities in terms of international engagement? So that is something I thought, and I will draw from my current experience of last 6 months that what are the areas where India has capacity and strength to share, and what are the areas where we will be able to, very happy to learn from other countries, other agencies, other systems as well. The first part with the pandemic, where we need far more international engagement as far as health and medical engagement is concerned, and may it be with WHO or any of the other health and well-being related organizations, is the footloose nature of the pandemic case load in terms of states, cities, districts, sectors, and social groups. That is the caseload in terms of number of people affected by a particular stage of the pandemic. In this case, we are being specific. And that's very, very important. I also suggest that future disasters will also continue to have a very footloose impact, because everything is so much connected. So it won't be very geographically specific, won't be very community specific, won't be very sector specific. It's going to be footloose. So how do you engage internationally when this particular risk, in this case, the risk of the pandemic impact and also multi-hazard risk is footloose? So that's one area. The second area where international engagement would be very important for us and for others is the ways of stabilizing and reverting the rapidly falling direct investments, micro investments and macro investments, national level investment, but also investments in local communities that are taking place internationally, as we know, in all economic activities that are there. As we see rapidly, we are wanting far more ways of being engaged in terms of economic decline that's taking place. And how does this international investment engagement can take place? Would it be IFC, for example, international financial institutions such as World Bank, ADB, and many new that have come up? Would CDRI will play a role? That's something to be detailed out. And perhaps Pradeep Jina sir very clearly had mentioned the role of this kind of need that will be needed. The third area where possibly we can be very open for international two-way engagement or multi-way engagement is in terms of looking at arresting, that is stopping, and stabilizing so that it doesn't go further down. And in fact, if we can reversing the manufacturing out, as we are seeing that irrespective of all the efforts that we are putting, we need far more efforts to be made to see that the manufacturing output, which is declining rapidly in various parts of the country, and we know how to deal with it. A lot of measures are taken by the government of India, but there will maybe a lot of measures others are taking from which we can learn as well. So there it would be very good, for example, UNESCAP, for example, private sector, large corporate sector may have some suggestions to make, World Economic Forum may have some suggestions to make in terms of international manufacturing and marketing engagement. That how do we pick up the manufacturing which is slowing down very rapidly? The next and fourth area of engagement would be the stabilizing and pulling back millions of people from extreme poverty. And we've done one of the largest exercise in any country to reach out to large number of people by direct transfer of resources with various programs, including Jan Dhan Yojana. But of course, that needs further improvement, further targeting, further result orientation. So that's something we can have in terms of international engagement in stabilization fund for anti-poverty programs, so that the impact of this particular pandemic, but any disaster in future, especially protect the poor, vulnerable. May that be universal social protection measures, such as ILO, UNDP, international NGOs have been talking about and have piloted in many parts of the world. And the fifth one, and I'll be stopping soon, is about arresting and reversing loss of full-time jobs that has already taken place, especially in the middle and lower income hardest hit communities. And this will happen again and again in any natural disaster, quote unquote natural, or any disaster further. So how do we stop? What is it that we need in terms of reversing this, arresting this, and some international engagement in exchange of innovative initiatives that other countries may have taken, which may come via ILO, for example, private sector, for example. There's a whole report on future of work that has come out, which shows us which are the new opportunities for the work that is coming up. So that's something we can look at. The sixth example is stop the steep and unprecedented decline in the Human Development Index, HDI, but human capital as well, if that's what the World Bank wants to look at from, in undermining years of progress. So we move ahead slowly but steadily out of poverty, out of human development deficiency, and one disaster and it pushes us back, the whole country, couple of months, in this case, large number of years, almost estimates say it is almost 6 years we've been pushed back as far as our HDI is concerned. Somebody should calculate it more accurately. So in that way, we need to attract international funds for direct grants in human development investment and programs. And that's something that can be developed. The other area is from actually predominantly Kerala, but all across India. And our minister, Shri Muralidharanji, also pointed it out. Perhaps he's far more aware of that. And that is the global remittance acceleration and management cooperation bonds. That is what is happening is large number of international money is coming to the local communities through a wide range of global remittances. Even national remittances are also playing very active role. And how do you deal with that when they are affected, disrupted? And maybe there is a role for organizations such as UNESCAP, international networks such as ADRRN, for example, can play. There is also a need in terms of engagement we should look at in terms of as the pandemic will continue longer, and we quite know it's going to continue longer, and move from crisis response program to crisis management facility, a long-term facility to deal with something which is international in nature, may it be pandemic or made. And here the experience of organizations such as Sphere, for example, such as UNDRR, for example, would be very useful for us to look at. Also, we've done a lot of effort in terms of how do you include groups and people who are being left out. May that be Adivasis, ethnic groups, high altitude groups, informal sector workers, may it be Dalits, for example, minorities, for example. So how do you have social impact fund design, which will actually invest in those being excluded or not fully included in the process? And that we can learn and do. And the last one is what the minister also mentioned, and also was mentioned by Khalsa, and that is the double burden that women of our country have, which has become a triple burden when a disaster comes. Burden of household, burden of income, and also burden of disaster response and recovery that she faces and how do we have international engagement with women workers, women organizations, so that the impact on them doesn't become a burden that they cannot pay. So these are the 10 areas where international engagement can be renewed and looked at from a new point of view, because these are something we are facing quite overwhelmingly. And the way ahead, I would say, would be a very good idea if NIDM, NDMA, NDRF, civil society organizations together came up with some way of reviewing and scoping what are the new areas of international engagement is possible. So I leave that at that stage, and I'll be very happy to answer any questions now, or you could send it to Surya Prakash or Dr. Ajit Kaur when they have time, and I'll be very happy to respond to that. Once again, thank you very much for this very important, last but very important 10th point of the Prime Minister's program on disaster risk reduction in India. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for enlightening our participants and how we can improve cohesion in international response to disaster. So there is one question for you. Is there any international standard guideline available for disaster management, supporting and helping other countries during disaster time?
There are several actually, and some of them are related to more a crisis situation in terms of conflict and how do you get engaged there. UN-OCHA has guidelines, UNHCR has guidelines. We ourselves in the past have worked at South Asia level as India and have developed guidelines in terms of engaging with children and children's organizations, and those guidelines are there. The South Disaster Management Center, which is right now based in Gandhinagar in Ahmedabad, and very important center that is there. And then there are also guidelines in terms of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Society. Federation has guidelines of engagement. There are also guidelines by Sphere Standards, for example, in terms of how do you get engaged internationally and what are the things that you need to get. And I think India itself is developing its own way, a bit different than what we have done in the past, but how we'll be engaging, and which our Foreign Secretary has termed as the Indian way, and would be very good to include humanitarian response, disaster risk response into that Indian way as well. Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much, sir. Now for our last presentation, we have with us Professor Surya Prakash, Head GMR Division, National Institute of Disaster Management, and in charge of 3 specialized centers in NIDM. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Harjeet. Am I visible and audible?
Yes, sir.
May I request for sharing of content so that I can share my PowerPoint? I think we have already excelled over time due to initial delay some of the slides, but I will take forward with the PowerPoint. So are you able to see my screen? Harjeet, are you able to see the screen? Visible? Okay. Let me take you why we started with this international program and why regional, international, and global level collaborations are required, because we see some of the areas, particularly the Indo-Pacific area, which is facing almost 2/3 of the disasters. 80% of the earthquake, more than 80% of the earthquake happen in Pacific region, ring of fire, we say. And Indo-Pacific, if you consider, there are more than that, different types of disasters that are happening. So therefore, if we want to manage, that our Honorable Minister said, tsunami occurred in 2004. The source was in Indonesia, Sumatra, but it affected more than 12 countries on the Indian Ocean rim. So therefore, if we have a good collaborations in terms of our risk assessment, prevention, monitoring, early warning, and response, we are likely to reduce the risk and make our communities more resilient. So that is one of the issue which is also reflected in one of the UNESCAP reports, where it said more than 16,000 fatalities. I'm sorry, I had some cold. Had happened in a year just before that year in 2014. There was twofold increase, and 64% of the fatalities happened in that part. Similarly, if you come out of the total Indo-Pacific, we go to the Southeastern Asian part, that is worst affected among the Asian country. And it affects by all kind of hazards, including earthquake, landslides, droughts, avalanches, globs, lobs, cyclone, and tsunami. So, I'm sorry. And these disasters and hazards are actually products of the common environmental conditions in terms of the weather conditions, in terms of geological, geographical, physiographic, hydrological, and drainage conditions, which transcend across national boundaries. Not only the natural hazards and processes, even our vulnerabilities are common because we have a common socio-cultural, economical conditions in a particular geographical area. Say Asia is very different from Europe, and Europe is very different from America. So all these cultural instincts actually account for our vulnerabilities too. And then our strengths also. Not only we are vulnerable, but we have also possessing some strengths. And if we bring together these strengths and resources and our knowledge, then we can cooperate well and converge all our energies to reduce the risk through lateral, bilateral, and multilateral arrangements. And already many have come up because of various regions in our region as well as internationally, which we know as BIMSTEC, SAARC, BRICS, IORA, SCO, ASEAN, Indo-Africa summits, and others. So not only very neighbor, even across the borders, beyond the neighbors, we can have international collaborations. And communication-based early warning systems. Tsunami early warning system by INQUIST is now giving information to other countries in the Indian Ocean rim as well as other countries as well. And also similarly, our IMD is also working. We recently had some experiences when our teams from NDRF went to Fukushima after the Sendai tsunami, and also to Nepal earthquake immediately after the earthquake was reported. Our Honorable Prime Minister said to the Prime Minister of Nepal. And we were also part of the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. Ms. Vangai told that we have actually the target 6 in Sendai framework where it was mentioned that international collaborations need to be enhanced. Not only the Sendai framework, but also SDG goal 17 emphasize, building partnerships, and our Prime Minister point agenda 10 also talks about cohesion in international response. And we had seen during COVID-19 situation also, one of the groups, Empowered Groups 6, was also made to emphasize these collaborations and partnerships, not only with civil society, NGOs, but also with international organizations like WHO, UNICEF, FAO, UNDP, etc. And we were motivated not only by the experts, but also senior dignitaries and functionaries. You can see the principal advisor to Prime Minister himself was present during SFDRR, UN Secretary General, and member NDMA. Shri Kamal Krishoji was also present in the Third World Conference at Sendai when this framework was decided, and they participated in all the discussions and the issues that was emerging at the Sendai when more than 6,000 experts and functionaries joined together, including the political representatives. It was found that globally, we have very high population in susceptible hazard-prone areas, and that is mostly because of economic compulsions and the climate change conditions. And this is resulting into higher incidences, intensities, and impacts of these disasters and also their distributions. So lack of efficient coordination and collaborations at different levels across different sectors, disciplines, and borders actually led to higher aggravations of the disaster scenarios, susceptibilities, severity, spread, suddenness, speed, and swiftness of these situations. Disasters are regional in nature because they don't know the boundaries. So they will cross the boundaries, and different types of disaster may strike different areas. So maybe one country is affected by cyclone, other is affected by tsunami. For example, in our neighborhood, if we see Nepal and Bhutan, they are not suffering cyclone or tsunami. They are suffering from, say, avalanches, landslides, and flood. Whereas our Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, they are suffering from cyclone and tsunami. So in different neighborhoods, different type of geographical and geodynamic conditions, we will face different types of disasters. We'll have to have a different kind of collaborations. So establish prior protocols and procedures for smooth cohesion and enforcement and coordination, convergence for our international response and aid. And this should actually account for all kind of activities, services, and functions or resources required, which may include the provisions for teams, their arrival, immigration procedures, or a number of teams, and the kind of actions to be taken and documents required by those teams, their identities, language, liaising, all other such issues which need to be facilitated for such international response without jeopardizing the rules and regulations of the affected country and without delaying the process. So clear roles and responsibilities with a coordinated, unified response mechanisms and networks already established, which can be mobilized very quickly. And all this should be possible through one-stop shop platform, which is well established by our ASEAN countries response center called ASEAN Humanitarian Assistance Group, and also by OCHA and other such organizations like WHO. So they have clear guidelines and also guidelines for the media handling, which actually disseminates all this information to the people at the right time with the right information. Therefore, avoiding the panic and rumor or misinformation. This would require knowledge about not only the disaster situations, but also about the local population, their customs, their traditions, so that the response doesn't hurt the local affected communities, and also rules, regulations, and procedures as per agreement. And these agreements have to be established before among these regional and international associations in a coherent manner and coordinated manner. So we had different strategies right from the beginning of the IDNDR, Yokohama strategy, followed by Yogo, and now the Sendai frameworks. And recently, IORA has taken a big initiative, and they have established their office and strengthened these cooperations and took up the initiatives along the Indian Ocean Rim. And all states adjoining the Indian Ocean Rim can become the member. At present, about 22 are there. And they're all secretariat is established in Mauritius with all kind of activities to be supported from that office. So this particular region is very important from hazard point of view because this is known as World Hazard Belt because of climatological, geological, and hydrological conditions. And UNESCAP reported that around 50% of the natural disasters occur in this region because of climatogenic and seismogenic nature. And this is also home to several island nations. Now, the countries which are big have both the land territories as well as the coastal territories or the plain territories. But the countries which are island nations and they are facing the climate change impacts are actually facing more troubles because of sea level rise and other related hazards. So increasing temperature, climate rise is very important. And we have this DRM practices and dissemination all has been promoted through the IORA, and we are enhancing these technical capabilities so that we can be proactive in reducing the disaster rather than just responding to them. So different work plans being worked out not only for cooperation and but in response, but also in resilience. And also there are guidelines for humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. So now tomorrow there will be one virtual conference by the IORA where they will have this COVID-19 issues to be discussed among the member states. We had protocols on specific disasters also, like Kyoto protocol or commitment that we had in Sendai. And we shared all our views at the national and international levels. And BIMSTEC is another important where the 7 member states had interacted and that exercises have been done. NDMA has been very closely involved. Environment and disaster management has been given a priority. And we had different types of exercises, including tabletop and field level exercises. And also not only on earthquake and flood, but also for areas of importance, for example, social heritage and other things. So we are working with all these events, and also in SARAG, which is setting up our guidance and guidelines from the United Nations, as was informed by Member Secretary through UN Assembly Resolution 57 of 152 in the year 2002. And situation actually was very good demonstration.
I hope all we understand that there is some technological error, so we can move ahead. With that, we have come to end of our technical session of today's webinar. Moving on to our valediction session, I would like to once again call upon ED and IDM Major General Manoj Kumar Bindal, VSM, for his concluding remarks. Sir, please.
Thank you, Dr. Harjit Kaur. I must say that this has been a really wonderful session today, in which international cooperation issues was discussed, and I'm thankful to all the speakers and the inaugural session speakers for giving out such valuable information. It's difficult to sum up at this stage, but the need to keep the agenda as a humanitarian agenda and not mix it with media or publicity or importance is very, very important. Interoperability has been brought out loud and clear, for which joint training and exercises is a must. Then quality of the product to be maintained, because when we are going there, we are showing off, showcasing the image of the country. So turnout, bearing, conduct, labeling, quality of the product, how we take care of the cultural sensitivities of the location that we are going. It is very important. Any HADR missions also of the UN, these are the first requisite that terrain, we must know the terrain out there. We must know what are the rules of engagement, what are the MOUs under which we can go there. And then the point about transformative role was brought about, that once we leave from there, we should have transformed them in some way. I'm bringing in a new aspect. Okay, it should be such a long-term engagement that we should also plan for, that we actually transform the lives of those people, and in the bargain, we have a friend out there. We have the country also gains a good friend out there. Not that we come back and we have maybe not done enough the way it was expected. So needs assessment and what is the required need, that should be given, not what we have is should be given. So there are many things which have been brought about, and there are ways which have been told by Srimad Mihir Bhattji about how we can engage in the present pandemic and what all engagements can take place. They were very, very researched topics, which I thank Dr. Mihir a lot. So with this, I once again thank each participant, and Dr. Jena from OSDMA for giving us such a good insight, Dr. Mihir Bhatt and Dr. Vanyan from Kunming. And thank you so much, and thank you, Dr. Surya Prakash and your team for this wonderful webinar. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, sir, for your concluding remarks. Now, I would request Mr. Anil Kathat, who is currently working young professional in Center for Hill Area Development, GMR Division, NIDM, for vote of thanks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Harjeet. Good afternoon to all the dignitaries, panelists, and participants. The theme of today's webinar was 10th point of Honorable Prime Minister 10-point agenda on TRR, with envisaged for greater unified response to disaster. India, since Vedic era, has followed the ideology of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam that instilled the understanding that the whole world is one family, and what the family members do. They stand shoulder to shoulder in each and every situation. Similarly, to minimize the graph of losses, world need to embrace the spirit of unity. In pursuance to strengthen the collective action against the disaster, India in year 2015 hosted first South Asian annual disaster management exercise to enhance levels of preparedness and risk resilience as well as mutual action against SAARC member countries to deal with any crisis situation and ensure minimum loss of lives and assets. Further, in year 2017, first BIMSTEC disaster management exercise was conducted by National Disaster Response Force in New Delhi for sharing best practices on all aspects of disaster management among the BIMSTEC member countries. BIMSTEC region is home to nearly around 1.5 billion people, constituting about 22% of global population. Such collaborative actions will help in finding the gaps in the strategies to reduce the impacts of disasters, and hopefully the inputs from today's webinar will be helpful to develop a roadmap to enhance the global partnership against disasters. At the outset, I would like to thank Honorable Minister of State for Home Affairs, Shri V. Muralidharan, for accepting our invitation despite of his busy schedule and gracing the webinar with his presence as chief guest and motivating and guiding us. I express a deep sense of gratitude to our dignitaries of inaugural session, Sri GVB Sharma, Member Secretary NDMA, Lieutenant General Syed Atta Hasnain, Member NDMA, Major General Manoj Kumar Bindal, Executive Director NIDM, for their guidance and insightful deliberation that set the ambience of today's webinar. Today's webinar was also graced by the presence of renowned experts, namely Shri Pradeep Kumar Jeena, Managing Director, OSDMA, Professor Surya Prakash, Head GMRT and IDM, Shri Mihir Bhatt, Director AIDMI, Brigadier Ajay Gangwar, Advisor NDMA, and Srimati K. Wanyang, DDMO from Meghalaya. I thank all of them for providing us opportunity to learn and gain from their experiences and knowledge. I express a deep sense of gratitude to all our participants without whom this webinar wouldn't be possible. In the end, I will like to thank my colleagues Dr. Harjeet Kaur, Mr. Raju Thapa, and our IT team of NIDM, Mr. Balaji, Mr. Shobhit, and Mr. Gaurav for their support in organizing this webinar. With these words, I conclude my vote of thanks.